The opening phases of the Battle of Britain saw the revolutionary introduction of radio direction finding, RDF, which the British later coined radar. Britain's chain home system, an array of massive transmitting and receiving towers along the coast, provided commanders with unprecedented early warning of incoming Luftwaffe raid. Concurrently, Germany developed its own highly accurate ground-based fire control radars, such as the Würzburg series, capable of tracking individual bombers and guiding anti-aircraft fire and night fighters with lethal precision. This mastery of the electromagnetic spectrum fundamentally altered aerial combat, shifting the advantage dramatically to the defenders. For the attacking bomber forces, this meant that traditional tactics, speed, altitude, and darkness, were no longer sufficient protection. A new, non-kinetic countermeasure was urgently required, one that could blind the enemy's electronic eyes and restore the element of surprise that had been lost. The solution emerged through a remarkable instance of parallel, independent research in 1940. At the Telecommunications Research Establishment (TRE) in Britain, the idea of creating artificial echoes to overwhelm radar screens was formalized. The key theoretical breakthrough is often credited to Joan Curran, a brilliant young physicist working on explosive fuses. She hypothesized that the most efficient way to achieve maximum radar reflectivity was by dispersing small strips of metal foil, precisely cut to be a half wavelength of the enemy's radar frequency. Simultaneously, Robert Cockburn, a key TRE official, independently reached the same critical conclusion. Their work established the fundamental principle of dipole reflection. When dropped, these conductive strips would resonate powerfully in the radar beam, appearing on the screen not as individual pieces of debris, but as a dense, impenetrable cloud. The effectiveness of Chaff hinges entirely on a precise understanding of electromagnetism. For any piece of metal to efficiently reflect a radar signal, its length must be cut to an integer multiple of the half wavelength of the incoming signal, with the half wavelength being the most efficient. For instance, to jam a common German Würzburg radar operating near 500 MHz, a 60 cm wavelength, the strips needed to be cut to approximately 30 cm. This was not a one-size-fits-all solution. As the Germans developed new, shorter wavelength radars, Allied intelligence had to continuously track these changes, calculate the new length requirements, sometimes down to the millimeter, and ensure that production lines churned out the correctly sized strip. This requirement cemented Chaff as a technology inextricably linked to continuous radio intelligence operations. To ensure the utmost operational security, OPSEC, the groundbreaking technology was immediately assigned codeword. The British coined the term window, possibly because the strips of foil provided a window through the enemy's radar defenses, or perhaps simply to act as a mundane cover for the exotic scientific breakthrough. The Americans, who were also developing the technique, chose the name chaff, likening the strips to worthless straw or husks, chaff, mixed in with grain. Both terms became classified at the highest level. The secrecy surrounding the material was so extreme that for several years, even most bomber crews didn't know the exact purpose of the mundane-looking packages they carried. They only knew they were a vital countermeasure that must not be allowed to fall into enemy hands intact. Despite its successful testing as early as 1941, chaff/window was not deployed until July 1943, a crippling 2-year delay. This delay was a direct result of profound strategic apprehension among the British military leadership, specifically a paralyzing fear of reciprocity. They reasoned that the moment the Allies used the technique, German scientists, who were known to be working on similar concepts, would instantly understand the principle and deploy their own metal strip. Since British cities were significantly smaller and more vulnerable than their German counterparts, deploying chaff was seen as equivalent to giving the enemy a poisoned apple that would likely be used against their own densely populated target. Only when the Allied bomber forces were deemed strong enough to withstand the inevitable German retaliation was the risky decision finally made to deploy the war-winning innovation. The long-awaited moment for Chaff's debut arrived with Operation Gamara, the massive Allied bombing campaign targeting the strategically vital city of Hamburg in late July 1943. Hamburg was deliberately chosen as the perfect test case for its exceptionally robust and multilayered air defenses, incorporating hundreds of powerful flak batteries and a sophisticated network of radar stations, including the Würzburg fire control radar, all orchestrated by a centralized command. The strategic rationale was compelling. If Chaff could successfully neutralize Hamburg's formidable electronic shield, it would prove the concept's viability for future deep penetration raids across the Reich. Commanders recognized that this first deployment was not merely a tactical maneuver, but a psychological and technological declaration of war against the German electronic defense system itself. The stakes were monumental, as failure would have meant abandoning the war-winning potential of the new technology. The effect of Chaff was immediate, overwhelming, and devastating to the German command. As the lead bomber squadrons began dispensing the aluminum foil strips, tens of thousands of them, the screens of the German radar operators instantly dissolved into a blinding blizzard of white clutter, an impenetrable wall of interference. The radar receivers, unable to distinguish the small reflection from a massive bomber from the strong reflection of a cloud of perfectly tuned metal dipoles, registered thousands of false echoes. German air defense officers frantically reported tracking what appeared to be an attacking force 10 times the actual size of the bomber armada, scattered across an impossible expanse. This sudden, inexplicable electronic chaos was the beginning of a profound tactical paralysis for the Luftwaffe. The operational impact on the German ground-based air defense system was catastrophic. Their entire defense network relied on the precision of the Würzburg radar to guide the anti-aircraft flak batteries and direct the night fighters to the exact altitude and location of the incoming bombers. Chaff rendered this entire system instantly obsolete. The controllers were unable to achieve a lock on any real aircraft amidst the sea of phantom target. In a desperate act of strategic defeat, German defense commanders were forced to issue a devastating order: to abandon the highly effective, precise electronic targeting that had protected German cities for years, and revert to the primitive, slow, and nearly useless method of visual spotting by searchlights and ground observers. This shift effectively disarmed the core of their defense system. The success of the first Chaff deployment was chillingly measurable in the casualty figures. During the 5 main raids of Operation Gamara, the Allied Bomber Command suffered a loss rate of less than 3%, a figure considered miraculously low for a major deep penetration raid against a highly defended target. Before Chaff, a similar raid would have easily resulted in losses exceeding 15%. However, this tactical success came at an immense human cost to the city below. With its radar defenses nullified, Hamburg's ground defenses were rendered inert, allowing the bombers to operate with near impunity, leading directly to the widespread devastation and the tragic firestorm, Feuersturm, that destroyed large parts of the city and killed tens of thousands of civilians. Chaff was proven to be not merely a countermeasure, but a weapon of strategic, war-altering power. The German High Command's reaction was initially one of shocked disbelief and confusion, followed by an agonizingly slow technical response. Their prior confidence that the Allies would never deploy Chaff due to the fear of reciprocity left them without any prepared countermeasure. Once the reality set in, they scrambled to develop solutions. One early, desperate tactical response was the Dresden procedure, which involved guiding night fighters by placing them far outside the Chaff-affected zone and hoping they could visually intercept the bombers. More effective, albeit belated, was the technical development of new specialized radar receivers, notably the Naxos device, which was designed to tune in to the high-frequency radar emissions from the attacking aircraft themselves, attempting to filter out the massive, low-frequency clutter created by the Chaff strip. However, by the time these were widely deployed, the Allies had already gained a decisive advantage. The successful deployment of Chaff provided the Allied bombing campaign with a decisive, quantifiable tactical advantage. Prior to Operation Gemara, deep penetration raids into heavily defended German airspace typically resulted in unsustainable bomber loss rates, sometimes exceeding 15% to 20% in a single night, figures that threatened to break the morale and capacity of the bomber crews. After the introduction of Chaff, and its subsequent widespread use, average bomber loss rates dropped dramatically, often falling below 3% for major raid. This radical reduction in vulnerability was the key factor that allowed the Allied forces to sustain and escalate their campaign of area bombing against German industrial and urban centers, ensuring that the air war could continue unabated and with greater efficiency. The success of Chaff delivered a crippling psychological blow to the German defenders, particularly the elite Luftwaffe night fighter force. These highly skilled pilots, the night fighter aces, relied almost entirely on the accurate guidance provided by ground-based radar systems like the Himmelbett procedure. When Chaff rendered these systems useless, the aces were often forced to patrol blindly, relying on fleeting visual sightings or desperate, improvised tactics. This sudden neutralization of their technological superiority shattered the morale of some of the Reich's most effective aerial defenders, contributing to internal arguments and a subsequent, though temporary, de-emphasis on electronic warfare in favor of increasing raw aircraft production. Adding profound historical irony to the narrative, it was later discovered that German scientists, working independently as early as 1941, had conceived of the exact same countermeasure, which they codenamed Doppel, a reference to the German town where the material was tested. Prominent physicist Hans Erich Hallmann repeatedly submitted proposals for its development and deployment. However, his reports were ignored or filed away by the conservative Wehrmacht leadership, who viewed the idea as scientifically unproven or strategically unnecessary. This monumental intelligence failure meant that when the Allies deployed Chaff, Germany was caught entirely off guard, having been deliberately blind to a threat their own scientists had correctly identified years earlier. The eventual German technical response involved shifting from active defense, tracking bombers, to passive electronic warfare. They understood that they couldn't filter out the chaff, so they aimed to bypass it. This led to the rapid development of passive reception devices like Flensburg and Naxos. These devices were installed on German night fighters, and instead of looking for the echo of the bomber, they were designed to home in on the radio emissions coming from the Allied aircraft's own search and navigation radars, such as the British H-2S radar. This countermeasure began a deadly new phase in the electronic warfare chess game, forcing the Allies to constantly alter their own radar usage and frequencies. While brilliantly simple in concept, the logistical requirements for Chaff were staggering. To be effective, hundreds of kilograms of the finely cut aluminium-backed paper strips had to be produced and packaged for every single raid. Furthermore, the early Chaff was not dispensed automatically. Instead, it was a physically demanding and tedious job, often assigned to the bomber's flight engineer or a spare crew member. These men had to stand over a small hatch, manually unpackaging and throwing out the bundles of metal strips one after another for hours on end, often in extreme cold and under enemy fire. This highlights the low-tech, yet logistically intensive, human component of this high-tech electronic battle. The sheer scale of chaff usage quickly led to an industrial challenge known informally as the tinfoil war. The mass production demanded that tons of high-grade aluminium or metal-coated paper be continuously supplied, cut, and packaged with extreme precision. The cutting machines had to be constantly recalibrated as enemy radar frequencies shifted, making the production line a highly sensitive component of the war effort. This requirement for massive, sustained output meant that what appeared to be simple metal confetti became a critical strategic resource, necessitating high-level coordination between the military, scientists, and the civilian manufacturing sector to maintain the supply chain. As the war progressed, chaff technology evolved beyond simple, short-lived foil strip. researchers developed variants designed to confuse newer German radar systems. One notable evolution was rope, which consisted of longer, bundled sections of foil designed to be towed or released in large groups. These longer elements were tuned to disrupt German radar altimeters, which measured aircraft height, and to create larger, more persistent false targets on the enemy's long-range surveillance radar screens, further complicating the task of German air traffic controllers and defense strategists. The deployment of Chaff had a profound and immediate impact that extended beyond the military sphere into psychological warfare. For years, the German population had been assured that their advanced air defense technology was impenetrable. The sudden, devastating, and seemingly unstoppable raids that followed the first use of Chaff shattered this confidence. The inability of the Würzburg and Freya radars to function effectively proved that the Allies possessed a secret technological edge. This realization contributed significantly to the widespread demoralization of the civilian population, who now saw their technological shield as completely useless against the electronic warfare tactics of the enemy. Chaff stands as a crucial legal and ethical precedent in modern military history. It was the first widely and effectively deployed system of radio-electronic warfare, REW, establishing that the electromagnetic spectrum was a legitimate and vital domain of conflict, just like land, sea, and air. Its success irrevocably cemented the concept of the radar war, the continuous cycle of measure, countermeasure, and counter-countermeasure, into the military doctrines of all major world powers, ensuring that future conflicts would rely heavily on electronic superiority rather than mere kinetic force. The simple invention of Chaff remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Second World War. Today, Chaff is an essential countermeasure for virtually every modern military aircraft and naval vessel globally. While the composition has evolved, often using fiberglass filaments coated in aluminum, known as chaff rockets or flares, the core principle, creating a cloud of dipoles tuned to the enemy's radar wavelength, is unchanged. The World War II window is now an integral part of sophisticated countermeasure dispensing systems, proving that one of the simplest technologies of the war is still essential for survival in the complex, high-stakes environment of modern stealth and electronic combat.